Hello, I'm Esther Gitu Yuat. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Plumes of smoke rise from buildings in northern Gaza as Israel continues to batter the territory with heavy artillery and bombs. The International Organization for Migration says at least 700 people are dead in West Darfur after clashes earlier this month between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces in El Geneina. And as Chinese investment rises in Zambia's construction sector, many local builders are struggling to survive and hiring workers is getting harder. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Thousands of Palestinians are fleeing the northern Gaza combat zone in the Israel-Hamas war after Israel announced a window for safe passage. Officials in the Hamas-run enclave now say the Palestinian death toll has surpassed 11,000 people. In an effort to bring peace to the region, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin met with Indian officials in New Delhi Friday to discuss the war and other security issues. The World Health Organization says that 20 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are no longer functioning. Plumes of smoke rose from buildings following explosions in northern Gaza near the border with Israel Friday. The Israeli military says it has arrested 41 Palestinians in another large-scale raid in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli military also says it has arrested over 1,500 Palestinians in the West Bank since the start of the war, identifying 930 of them as affiliated with Hamas. The Palestinian Prisoners Club, which represents Palestinian detainees, says the numbers are much higher at 90 detained and 2,400 arrested in the West Bank since the start of the war. United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk is calling for an investigation into what he called the indiscriminate effect of Israel's bombardment and shelling in densely populated areas of Gaza. Turk says the high civilian casualty rate raises serious concerns that bombing amounts to disproportionate attacks in breach of international humanitarian law.
After 4 weeks of bombardment and shelling by Israeli forces in Gaza, the indiscriminate effects of such weapons in a densely populated area is clear. Israel must immediately end the use of such methods and means of warfare, and the attacks must be investigated. So I appeal as a matter of urgency for Israeli authorities to take immediate measures, to take steps to ensure the protection of Palestinians in the West Bank, who are being on a daily basis subjected to violence from Israeli forces and settlers, ill treatment, arrests, evictions, intimidation and humiliation. There's also been a sharp increase in settler violence and takeover of land across the West Bank. Since 7 October, nearly 1,000 Palestinians from at least 15 herding communities have been forced from their homes. In the context of the coercive environment they live in, the displacement of these communities may amount to the forcible transfer of a population, which is a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Continued widespread impunity for such violations is unacceptable, dangerous, and it is in clear violation of Israel's obligation under international human rights law. The extensive Israeli bombardment of Gaza, including the use of high-impact explosive weapons in densely populated areas, raising tens of thousands of buildings to the ground, is clearly having a devastating humanitarian and human rights impact.
Turk says international human rights and humanitarian law must be respected to help protect civilians and allow desperately needed aid to reach Gaza. U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby confirms that Israel has agreed to 4-hour daily humanitarian pauses in the fighting in northern Gaza. The U.S. senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain has the details.
As thousands of Palestinians fled the fighting and Israel's bombing, U.S. President Joe Biden was asked whether there was any chance of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and he replied, none. He was also asked if he's getting frustrated with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for not listening to U.S. requests.
It's taking a little longer than I hoped.
The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says more than 10,000 people have been killed in the territory since the Hamas attack on Israel that killed 1,400 people and triggered the war. At the State Department daily briefing Thursday, Deputy Spokesperson Vedant Patel provided some details about Israel's announcement that it has agreed to 4-hour daily humanitarian pauses in the fighting in northern Gaza.
There will be 2 humanitarian corridors allowing people to flee the areas of hostilities in the northern part of Gaza. The first such corridor, open between 4 and 5 hours every day for the past few days, has already enabled many thousands of people to reach safer areas. The second route along the coastal road will enable many more thousands to reach safer areas in the south.
On Capitol Hill Wednesday, anti-Israeli government protesters showed up to a hearing where most Democratic and Republican lawmakers expressed their strong support for Israel. But some Democrats were troubled by the large number of civilians killed in Gaza. Democratic member Joaquin Castro said Israel has fired more than 20,000 bombs on Gaza and only about 5 hostages have been released.
It seems to me that Prime Minister Netanyahu is prioritizing collective punishment over the release of hostages. And I'm very concerned about that.
Another Democrat was concerned that new House Speaker Mike Johnson might be playing politics with U.S. military funding for Israel.
Speaker Johnson brought an Israel-only supplemental to the floor. This supplemental is unprecedented. It conditions aid to Israel on domestic policy objective and stands no chance of passing through the United States Senate.
The Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Michael McCaul, said he agrees.
And let me just say, I too agree we need to move swiftly on a national security aid package that both addresses the threat from Russia to Ukraine and Europe, the threat from Communist China to Taiwan and the Pacific, the threat from the Ayatollah in Iran to Israel by its proxies and the southwest border.
The Democratic majority Senate will not take up the $14.3 billion bill providing funding for Israel's air and missile defense systems passed by the Republican majority House of Representatives last week. Democrats objected to Republicans paying for the aid to Israel by making cuts to the budget of the Internal Revenue Service, the agency responsible for taxation. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Now for more on the Israel-Hamas war, correspondent Ricky Rosen is standing by in Tel Aviv. Israel, Ricky, what more can you tell us about the conflict on Friday?
Well, the Israeli army and local Gazan sources say that Israeli troops are getting very close to the major hospital in northern Gaza, the Shifa hospital, where in order to destroy the Hamas command center and tunnel network that is supposed to be built under the hospital. People are very concerned because there are thousands of Palestinians who have sought refuge inside the hospital, as well as thousands who are injured inside the hospital, and nobody can say what will happen when Israel actually gets to the area of the tunnels underneath the hospital. At the same time, there's been an announcement by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Yesterday, he said to an American news network that Israel would not stay indefinitely in Gaza. But today, in a meeting with mayors of towns that surround the Israeli towns that surround the Gaza Strip, that in fact he believes that Israeli forces will have to stay indefinitely in order to protect and allow the residents around Gaza Strip, Israeli residents, to return safely.
And very quickly, Ricky, what is the impact of this war on journalists like you who stay awake day and night to inform the world on what's happening?
Well, there haven't been Israeli journalists or journalists on this side of the border who've been seriously injured or killed in the war. But in Gaza, according to different estimates, between 34 and 50 journalists have been killed, and including some whose whole families were wiped out in airstrikes. And the journalists have to stay in the north because that's where the fighting is concentrated, and that's where they have to report from.
Right.
And they run specifically to the dangerous areas. So it's been quite tragic.
Ricky, many thanks for your reporting. As always, Ricky Rosen live for us from Tel Aviv, Israel. Refugees fleeing Sudan's West Darfur are reporting a new surge in ethnically driven violence after the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces seized a military base. Here's David Doyle with more.
People on the road out of Sudan's Darfur have few possessions. What many do carry is grief. On Tuesday, those arriving at the Chad border town Adre were reporting a new surge in ethnically driven killings in West Darfur. Many here are receiving news of their family members. Asiya, who fled with her mother and her sister's children, says she's been told her brother is dead. They can't find her father.
They burned everything and took everything. We did not bring anything with us, only God and our clothes.
War between Sudan's army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces has reignited ethnic violence in Darfur. In September, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, said the RSF and allied Arab militias had killed hundreds of non-Arab people, primarily from Masalit communities. Arab militias have previously denied engaging in ethnic cleansing, and the RSF has said it was not involved in what it described as a tribal conflict. Over the past week, the RSF has taken over the main army base in West Darfur's state capital, El Geneina. 3 of those escaping to Chad on Tuesday said they had witnessed killings by Arab militias and RSF personnel targeting the Masalit in Adamata. It's an outlying district where the army base and a camp for internally displaced people are located. The RSF did not immediately respond to a request for comment, and Reuters was unable to independently verify what took place. Nabila Abdulrahman says people in Adamata were killed and displaced.
Children are slaughtered, women's money and belongings are robbed, and they can't escape.
Sudan's war has uprooted more than 6 million people. More than 500,000 of them have crossed into Chad, according to the International Organization for Migration. But renewed violence appears to have triggered a sharp increase. Médecins Sans Frontières said more people arrived in the first 3 days of November than across the entirety of the month before. That's around 7,000, mainly women and children, the medical charity said, carrying with them stories of large-scale violence against civilians.
That was David Doe of Reuters reporting. Now, for more on the crisis in Sudan, Robert Vokes, Director of Programs at Mercy Corps Sudan, joins me from Port Sudan. Robert, welcome to Africa 54. And let me start by asking you what's happening to civilians in El Geneina.
Yeah, thank you very much, Esther. So, yes, it's a very desperate situation in Darfur at the moment, as your package mentioned, especially in the West Darfur area. We're seeing large numbers of refugees coming across the border into Chad in very, very poor conditions due to the fighting, especially in Geneina and across Darfur, on top of the existing displacement within Darfur and across country. Lots of the people are coming across with few or no belongings at all, so desperately in need of assistance.
Now, you talk of assistance. Your organization is one of those humanitarian organizations helping people out there. We understand that civilians are in dire need of medicine, shelter, food. What is your organization doing specifically to help them?
So Mercy Corps, we're responding to the crisis in different parts of the country, both in Darfur, but also in other parts of Sudan. As you mentioned, over 6 million people have been displaced by the conflict, as well on top of the refugees that have fled into Chad and other parts, other countries surrounding Sudan. In terms of Mercy Corps, we're supporting people in terms of food assistance, where markets are functioning, especially through cash assistance. We're supporting in terms of the provision of water, fresh water, sanitation and hygiene as well, and also helping people to rebuild their livelihoods, especially some of those in the rural communities, if they're able to return back to farming or other activities as well. But the needs are very, very large, unfortunately, at the moment in Sudan.
Well, Mercy Corps, from your organization's perspective, where do you see this war? Because, it's begun quite a while ago. We had to deal with other issues of the world, but now we're seeing more chaos happening. Briefly tell us what's happening and what do you do next?
So, unfortunately, the situation, remains very dire. I know there's negotiations ongoing in Jeddah, but on the ground, the situation is very, very difficult for the people in Sudan. On top of the fighting, we're seeing a lot of economic problems. So even in those areas which are not sort of directly affected by the conflict, people are suffering economically in terms of making ends meet. So the prospects at the moment do seem quite bleak, unfortunately, for people in Sudan. We're trying our best to assist, along with many other humanitarian many other humanitarian organizations. But yeah, the situation is very difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Vokes. Robert Vokes is the Director of Programs at Mercy Corps, Sudan. The increase of Chinese investment in the construction sector in Zambia has left many local builders struggling to survive. Daniel Tonga has the details from Lusaka.
For more than a decade, Chinese businesses have exerted influence in almost every sector in Zambia. However, some business owners say the Chinese investment comes at a great cost to local construction companies. Many now find it difficult to compete to the Chinese companies in bidding for construction contracts.
When the Chinese come in, they come in with everything. Once they win the tender, what they do is something else, it's different. So even the small contracts that we pray for to get, they're all being taken away by the Chinese. So it's kind of a challenge. It's kind of a hard competing with Chinese.
Some contractors say Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, which funds infrastructure construction in many developing countries, typically brings Chinese workers, leading to unemployment for Zambians.
When you're into business, construction business, if you stay for a year without a job, it's not only you, the owner of the company, who's going to suffer. You've got other people who work for you. You know what I mean? How are you going to pay those people? How are you going to, because if you're not given a job, if Zambian contractors are not looked into, it means we're killing the Zambian contractors, because those people employ in Zambians, skilled and unskilled labor. You know what I mean?
However, the government says all its public construction projects are based on the public-private partnership or PPP model, which does not favor any foreign investor.
Those entities that have got money can come through to construct, and then through a PPP model be able to recoup their investment. That is where we can have local entities or contractors try to say that the government is excluding them. Quite to the contrary, they are not being excluded. It is a model that is in place that recognizes that the government presently, the government treasury, has got no sufficient funds to be able to support public sector construction projects that require government to fork out money into the sector.
The National Association for Medium and Small-Scale Contractors, which looks after the interests of contractors, says the coming of Chinese companies has led to the collapse of big Zambian construction companies.
Zambian companies have been wiped out by these Chinese companies because they are backed by their governments in the first place, and two, they have significant sources of cheap capital, so they can access money and equipment at concessional rates, while the Zambian companies are unable to access such facilities. This has, over time, wiped out the Zambian contractors.
Some analysts say although the Zambian economy could gain greater capital investment from Chinese investment, local companies will feel the pain of Chinese influence, especially in the construction sector. Daniel Tonga, VOA News, Lusaka.
Still to come, flooding inundates parts of Africa. We'll be right back.
The misuse of social media can lead to the spread of falsehood that endangers lives and property. Nigerian authorities are seeking to pass a law that would give the government power to regulate digital platforms across the country. However, opponents say it's an attempt to control free speech and dissenting opinions. This week on Our Voices, we discuss government bans and internet blackouts said to preserve social order that have created challenges for those who use social media. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
In other news, a New York-based climate watchdog says the French oil company Total Energies is failing to protect the sanctity of hundreds of graves in a project that's aiming to build a heated pipeline from Uganda to a port in Tanzania. Total Energies denies the charges. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is authorizing the deployment of 3,000 army personnel to help combat illegal mining activities, according to the president's office. The South Africa Minerals Council says illegal mining occurs at both disused and active mines. And the U.S. Census Bureau estimates the world's population exceeds 8 billion for the first time. The agency estimates the global population passed the threshold in September. The Bureau says the overall trend is longer lifespans, offsetting fewer births. Now, residents displaced from their homes amid heavy flooding that has inundated areas across several African countries are struggling. VOA's Paul Ndiho has more.
Mogadishu citizens are cleaning up their homes following heavy rains that caused parts of the city to flood. Teams spent hours cleaning up Somali's capital streets that were littered with waste and mud carried by flood waters. The National Disaster Management Agency says this is the worst flooding to hit the country in decades. It has killed nearly 30 people and forced thousands to flee their homes. Officials said the death toll and numbers of people displaced are likely to rise. The primary driver of current October-December rain season is El Nino, according to weather experts. It has brought intense downpours across various parts of Somalia. El Nino is a phenomenon in which surface waters of the Central and Eastern Pacific Ocean become unusually warm and cause changes in worldwide weather patterns. Flooding in neighboring Kenya has killed at least 15 people, according to the Kenya Red Cross. In Uganda, a submerged bridge has cut off a road linking Kampala to the oil fields in the northwest, according to Uganda's road authority. Authorities are scrambling to rescue thousands of stranded people from flood waters, which comes on the heels of the region's worst drought in 40 years. Climate change often affects ocean surface temperatures and causes above average rainfall. Scientists say climate change is causing more intense and more frequent extreme weather events. In response, African leaders are proposing new global taxes and reforms to international financial institutions to help fund climate change action. Paul Ndiho, VOA News, Washington.
Let's turn to something more entertaining. The Africa Conference for Collaboration, Exchange and Showcases. It's taking place in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. For all the details, Music Time in Africa host Heather Maxwell joins us live from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Esther. Yes, that's right. The conference called Access 2023 kicked off yesterday, and it continues all weekend at the Mlimani Center in Dar es Salaam and also here at the warehouse. Now, I arrived earlier in the week with my VOA colleague from the French to Africa service, Roger Muntu, and in collaboration with the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, we were able to meet with some local journalists and radio presenters at the American Center to exchange ideas and information about music in Tanzania, the music industry, and how they can make it better and make it grow and pierce the international market. Now, I also gave a concert at the Alliance Française, again supported by the U.S. Embassy in Dar, with a local jazz group. They're called the Mopao Swahili Jazz Band. We performed a great blend of originals, jazz standards, and the classic Swahili song, Malaika, which was, as you can imagine, a pretty big hit.
Hey, Heather. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, so anyway, now we are at the showcase part of Access. The live concert is about to kick off, and it kicked off with Sho Majozi, one of South Africa's brightest shining pop stars right now. We're really excited. After that, there's another band, and then tomorrow we start all over again.
So, Heather, you know, Tanzania is so famous for something they call bongo flavor. I'm sure now you're familiar with that. Is this all incorporated
Absolutely.
with all those artists joining you in Dar es Salaam?
Yes, it is. However, we're not seeing Diamond Platinum's tonight. We all wish we would, but he's not here. But oh yes, bonga flavor is well represented here, as well as many other African music genres and musicians from all over the continent. This is a pan-African music conference, Esther. It's really exciting and a great opportunity for a lot of artists and music business professionals.
Enjoy Dar es Salaam. It's beautiful, great food. I'm sure you'll have some fun before you come back. Thank you so much, Heather. Heather Maxwell reporting live for us from Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a great weekend.